Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, navigating the human experience together.
Hafade, Tiro, and welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we are talking about journalism in the Marianas. And our guest today is the president of the CNMI Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, and he is also the regional correspondent for KUAM News, Thomas Manglona II. Thomas, it was a pleasure to chat with you.
Yes, thanks for having me. Thanks.
Maybe you could start us off with the revival of the local SPJ chapter this year after 3 decades. How did that come about?
That's right. So the CNMI SPJ chapter, we are one chapter of 6,000 members nationwide under the Society of Professional Journalists. Basically, every state has one. And we revived it after 3 decades here in the CNMI. Actually, the Marianas variety editor, Zali Dandan, was part of the original group that many years ago. And he's a member now today. Of course, he's still the editor. And we have many other members. KSPN, our friends here where we're shooting this interview. KUAM, of course, the NMI News Service, Saipan Tribune, and the Marianas Variety. So we represent basically every journalist and news organization that is in the CNMI practicing journalism every single day. And so we revived it for 3 main reasons. The first is to educate. We often talk about how there's a lack of a workforce, lack of interest. Journalism is no different from any other industry in the CNMI. We too have a shortage of workers. And so we hope that if we focus on education, visit schools, visit groups, educate them about what it means to be a journalist, the public service kind of motivation behind it, and really the joys of the job as well, that hopefully people will want to become journalists and report on their communities.
You don't talk about the challenges.
We do talk about the challenges, and we'll probably get to that later in this interview. The second goal is to organize. As a journalist, I think there are just 12 or so of us here in the island, because that's how many are in our membership. Sometimes the job can be really solitary, and you're kind of on your own. And so we wanted to create a community. And so that's what we're doing. I mean, we're talking to each other over lunch at our monthly meetings. We're talking to each other about our lives. We're not just our jobs. And so it provides a sense of camaraderie and just, fellowship with other journalists. And that's one thing I love about the islands, is that while there are competitive parts of the job, of course, we want to get the story out right first. We really do work together, because the government doesn't own the information. The news organizations don't own the information. The public owns information, especially that impacts their daily lives. So those are some of our goals. And of course, our third goal is to advocate. The First Amendment is under attack in our nation. The First Amendment, for those of you who might not know, goes like this. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That is our First Amendment. And the freedom of the press and freedom of speech are so critical to that. And so part of our goal is to advocate for expanded access to an open government for public information. 2 recent examples. Recently, we met with the CNMI Judiciary to start discussing possibilities for cameras or audio recording in the court for cases of legitimate public interest, or high-profile cases involving former government officials. And so that's just one example of our advocacy. And of course, if any reporter faces any potential lawsuit, the National SPJ also provides support for things like that to protect the First Amendment.
I think, and we're going to get later on in the interview into some of the details of the job, but big picture, how is journalism important to a healthy democracy? You know, we open the paper, we want to know what the news is, but really, what would our community or our democracy look like without freedom of the press or without you guys doing what you do?
Well, it's all about being informed, right? How can you make the right decisions without the right information? You might think of it as almost informed consent as well. And this goes across the board, right? For the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. I mean, if you look at the roots of democracy, at least in the Western democracy, it's because we didn't want kings and queens. No one person is a dictator who gets to decide for us how to live our lives or decide for us what to do for our families. And so it's really rooted in that. And I mentioned the three branches because the fourth branch, known as the fourth estate, is journalism. That's often what it's called. We provide the additional check and balance. But I do also want to, I say that with a caveat being that news organizations also, as part of SBJ, need to be held accountable for their reporting as well. We're not perfect. We make mistakes, and part of SBJ is to ensure we make less of those, and that when we do, it's corrected.
What are the signs of good journalism? For example, maybe you could roll this into your answer. When you look at an article, whether it be a local article or a foreign article, national, what are you looking for that you said, okay, they did a good job, that is good journalism?
Right. Well, you know, I get this question a lot. The quick answer is it has full context and multiple sources and sides to the story. The longer answer, which I guess I'll shorten for the purposes of the show.
No, please.
is about, you know, looking at the framing of things. Everyone approaches it from a different angle. A national outlet will come here and cover something differently from what a local journalist would cover. So I think talking about local journalism, we're in a small community. I always say, you know, journalism here is not like journalism in New York. Not saying that the standards are lower or that it's easier, but that there's a different way to move about the job, right? We're not going in, stomping our feet and demanding for answers. This is a small community, right? We approach it with care, with empathy, and also taking in mind all the history and culture that the islands carry, right? And so it's subjective. I often think about some suggestions when you talk about what's good news, what's bad news. There have been some, you know, research, some academics out there who are saying, oh, maybe we should label news like how we label our food, right? How much of it is false? How much of it is opinion? How much of it is spin? But we also want to maybe caution against practices that might, you know, in some ways standardize and set too much of a strict kind of template for it, because that's what the First Amendment is about, right? We have to allow bad speech in order for us to have good speech too. And that's the beauty of our democracy.
What are the markers of a legitimate news source, would you say, that, you know, when you see that the way that they do their work, that you can say, okay, this is, they're probably getting it right. They're doing the best they can to really get the news out.
Right. And so I actually wanted to just borrow from CBS News Standards. KUAM is a CBS and NBC affiliate, so I wanted to share some of the tips that they have as part of our practice. You know, the first thing is to check the source. I know we're in a WhatsApp forwarding world, we're in a Facebook sharing community, but really going directly to the source is probably your best bet, right? Because Facebook and all these other social media outlets have really taken away kind of the gatekeeping mechanism that news used to be. Before, you would have to wait for the paper. You would have to wait for the show at 6:30. Now it's instant, and now it's harder to tell what's real when you have a waterfall of information coming at you. Secondly, look for visual clues, right? These are really basic things, but can help you a long way, right? When was the article published? And because we're in a small community, you can check who published it, right? And you're more than likely to know them. you got to check other news outlets, right? And this is probably a fun game you can play yourself if you want to be entertained.
Do you play this game?
Yeah, I check other news outlets every day.
I'm sure you
What
do.
did they get? What did I get? What information was disclosed to them? What information was I able to obtain? Even though we might be covering the same story, there are tidbits in there that might be different in terms of the context. And so, those are some of the tips. I always encourage people to go directly to the source if you see something questionable on social media.
That is very good. And that would actually probably help dispel a lot of misinformation, misunderstandings, and just flat out lies.
Correct. Yes. And the great thing about living on this island is that, especially if it's about a person or organization, we can go and ask them.
Right. Absolutely. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the job or the career, the profession after the break.
All right. Thank you.
We'll be back after this.
Looking for resources about Marianas history, culture, and more? Well, check out the Northern Marianas Humanities Council's collection. Our extensive video, audio, and photographic library can be found on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at 670 Humanities. Or check out the written resources on our website at nmhcouncil.org. And for those who prefer a good book, we also have a selection of local publications for purchase. So, dive in, explore, and share your comments as we navigate the human experience together.
Welcome back. We're talking about journalism and the CNMI chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists with President Thomas Manglona II. Tomas, let's talk about the Open Government Act. How does it work? How does it not work in journalism?
Right. Well, the beautiful thing about something like the Open Government Act and the CNMI, or even the Freedom of Information Act federally, is that you don't need to be a journalist to utilize this, right? You can be any public official, person, entity, nonprofit, to file an Open Government Act. And so I've filed a few of my own for stories. And when you file it, there's that 10-day deadline that that agency has. And you can ask for, the public information that you're seeking, whether that's some contracts, I know that's been in the news for the past few years, right? Contracts, letters. Recently, we had to file an Open Government Act to take a look at the termination letter that was sent to Mariana Global. Filing Open Government Acts for, contracts and basically anything else that is of public record. And I think that, just echoing my point at the top of the show, this information belongs to the public. It doesn't belong to the government. It doesn't belong to the news organizations. We are just the messengers. And so if you have any ideas on where to file your Open Government Act, go ahead and send them to me at tomas@kum.com. But also, right, there are agendas, right? Publishing them in advance, having them accessible so that people have sufficient time to submit public comments. I'm not an OGA expert by any means. I'm not an attorney either, but I have used those tools in my reporting for sure.
To your knowledge, are there certain things that a public office may not be required to disclose in Open Government Act?
Yeah, of course. I mean, personally identifiable information, particular bank records, sensitive information. You can probably think of it, right? Things involving juveniles as well. If you take a look and just Google the Open Government Act, it's very, very clear about what's public, what is not. But that really is also limited because if it's receiving public funds, we ought to know how it's being spent. So,
what about executive sessions for public offices? They have their meeting. Can anything be discussed in an executive session? And this is normally where they ask everybody to leave the room except
right. Yes, and in my experience, the executive sessions, they disclose just generally what's going to be talked about, and then afterwards they have to also disclose what decision was made in that process, right? And of course, there's always those, kind of limitations if you're dealing with personnel matters or things like that. And so, I know executive sessions might be, kind of necessary, but as much as possible, I would love to see our government be truly open, because I think even though we might know an outcome, what's more interesting is how you got there. But like I said, I'm not in a position to change the law right now or anything. So if anyone out there has ideas, I'm open to hearing them, because that is part of SBJ's mission, is to expand public access.
Okay, switching gears from government work, what expectation could an individual have to privacy when it comes to journalism? Like yourself, for example, if they wanted to write about you, you're kind of a public figure. Does it vary whether you're a public figure and whether you're a private individual?
Yes, it does. Yes, it definitely does, right? If you're running for office, if you're putting yourself out there, you are considered a public figure, open to scrutiny, questions, and things of that. Of course, if you're a private individual, you do have that expectation of privacy. We could go into, if you're out in a public area and you're having a conversation and I hear about it, there's no expectation of privacy in a public area, right? So we can get into the nitty-gritty of that. But for the most part, we try to respect people's private lives. Oftentimes I see in court cases or arrests, DPS, dealing with the judiciary, the reason why that is of public concern is, well, first of all, public safety, but also there are public funds being used to address these matters in our community. But even within there are still some ethical guidelines that you might follow, even though they're not necessarily legal guidelines.
All right. Thank you for that. Can we talk a little bit about press releases and what is a press release and why is it important when you're consuming news to identify whether something is a press release or a news article?
Right, and so a press release, of course, is a prepared statement, narrative. It can look like an article that is released by a government entity or an organization. And that is not journalism. That is a prepared statement that is filtered, that is sanitized, that is carefully crafted. And when it comes to journalism, we're trying to sift through that, right? There might be a narrative in a press release that is more of a marketing point for that organization or government entity and not really getting to the truth of the matter. And so, yeah, you should always look out. I know the papers do a good job in putting whether something is a PR or if it's written by a correspondent or a reporter. Those distinctions are very important. And that's in addition to checking the date, right? Check who wrote it. And if it says PR, that's a press release.
And that comes at the end of it usually.
Sometimes it comes at the end or in the beginning. And, sometimes even if I tend not to republish press releases because I'd rather do an original report myself. But sometimes there are nuggets of information that you can use and then do some enterprise reporting and use that as a starting point, but not your only point in the reporting.
So when people see this little PR or press release, they know that that is something coming from an office or a company, as you said, an organization with a particular agenda, shall we say.
That's correct. Yes, exactly.
Not necessarily a bad agenda,
yes.
but it's important
I know
to be
agenda
aware.
sounds kind of,
like
it has a bad meaning behind it. But no, you're right. We have different
unbiased.
intentions, right? We have different intentions, and our intention is to inform you objectively about what's happening. A press release probably has one goal in terms of getting what they want out to you and not add any other information that might be different from what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, a lot of people get nervous when they're approached by the media for an interview. There was something that you shared to the students in Rhoda when you and I went for a journalism workshop, and it was about responding to the media with an on-the-record, off-the-record, or on-background, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
Can
perfect.
you explain the difference and how people can use this if they are approached by the media?
I love this because there are different ways you can talk to a journalist. On the record means, and before every interview, at least the way I do it, I ask them, how would you like to speak? And here are the terms. On the record means everything you say is publishable. Off the record means technically this conversation didn't happen, but thanks for some of the ideas that might lead me somewhere else. Now, on background is something that I wish we kind of had more of, and is something that I've tried to do in my reporting here. On background means, you might have some background information about something good, something bad, something controversial maybe, and I won't ever attribute it to you, but I will use it as knowledge in my reporting, and if you're agreeable to it, I can say someone with, someone at a high level in government who's familiar with the meeting told me. But it's more of a gray area where it will be included in the reporting, but the attribution maybe is not as specific.
So really, if they say off the record, you can't say anything that they said.
Well, of course, it needs to be agreed on. Oftentimes, I have people say something to me and then say, that's off the record. It has to come first, right? It has to come first. We need to be clear.
Point.
Yeah, that's why. But also, ethically, it's my job as a journalist to make sure that the person I'm talking to understands. And, we can also just have a casual human-to-human conversation, not everything, right, with a journalist. We're people too.
Is this interview on the record?
It is on the record. I think there are 3 cameras.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, but yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. And if you find yourself speaking to a journalist anywhere, ask them if you can speak on background first if you're not ready. And sometimes they'll say, okay, everything I gave you on background, I'm ready. Go on the record then. So you can shift between the...
On background, good words to know. As a former journalist myself, I can say I have made mistakes. At least one that I really remember that was really wrong. How have you ever, or how do you address it?
Yeah, we're human, of course. And I think with the demands of the job, you're just, thrown all this information about multiple events happening at the same time, sometimes covering all of them on your own, with a deadline, right? And, I heard a historian once say the only reason why I publish is because there's a deadline. I feel like that every day. We want to spend more time with this to make it better. So yes, sometimes they're just small inaccuracies. Sometimes maybe not the full context is there, but you can correct that, right? That's part of it, is to correct it. If it's an online article, redo the video, whatever it may be, and disclose that you are making a correction. So I think... But the way that I think is best around those types of mistakes is just to talk to as many people as you can about that, so that you have the full context. And we always want to make sure that if someone is referenced in another person's statement, that we also reach out to that person. So I think a lot of maybe the faults in journalism, at least in local journalism, is time and resources. Local newsrooms are stretched, they're stressed, and sometimes even overwhelmed. But the people who do this job do it really for public service. You don't become a journalist to be rich, at least not here on Saipan, right? And so I think a journalist, if you see them, we have so many wonderful members here at KSPN, the Tribune, the Variety, NMI News Service, who wake up every day to do the job all over again, right? Some people writing 3 or 4 stories a day, having to track all of that down. It's difficult work, but ultimately it's public service.
And I would say in my personal experience, knowing you guys, knowing the news sources you've mentioned, everybody really is going at it with the right intention.
Right. I always tell people, who might be nervous in an interview, I'm not here to make you look bad. I'm just here to reflect what you're telling me, right? And so I think we can think about it that way. And you're right. All of our members at SPJ, abide to the Code of Ethics. We carry this around with us, the Code of Ethics.
May I see?
Yes.
Oh, are you going to refer to it?
Yeah. The first one is seek truth and report it.
Oh my gosh, it's microscopic, Tomas.
The main points here: seek truth and report it, minimize harm, act independently, and be accountable and transparent. So those are kind of the biggest, kind of values we have.
Can you say that one more time?
Yes. Seek truth and report it, minimize harm, act independently, and be accountable and transparent. So that's
powerful.
what we hope to do every day.
So what else are you guys up to as a chapter? I know like you said, you've met recently with the judiciary. You had the forum with the candidates for a U.S. delegate. Anything else on the horizon?
Yes, we are also going to schools. We've presented at the Dr. Rita Hulka-Ino's Junior Senior High School. We presented at the Northern Marianas College, where I also teach a current issues class. And so if you're watching this, if you're a student, if you're a teacher, and you want us to come in, please, reach out to us. And we're continuing to advocate. We're taking a look at where maybe public information, access to it can be expanded, strengthened, or, improved. And then also we're hoping to uplift the next generation of journalists, because we need journalists here to report on everything that's going on. I think it's really important that we don't forget that about the fourth branch of government.
Why did you get into journalism?
Oh, I got into journalism because I was a kid on Rhoda, never seeing Rhoda reflected in the news. It felt like no one cared about my island. So I decided to do something about it. I started my blog when I was in middle school, and that's what led me to my first job at the Variety, then the Tribune, then the Pacific News Center, and then ultimately KUAM. But I got into this job to tell stories that are not told as much. And every day, every week, I think about what's happening on Rhoda and Tinian that I can share, because I think that they deserve the time and attention as well.
It's obviously more than just a job or a career for you. You're really passionate about it. Why?
For the reasons I just said. Yeah, I think journalism is a lifestyle for sure. And it's a public service. And so some people decide to run for office, some people decide to join a nonprofit, some people decide to go into journalism to tell the stories of their community. So that's my goal. Yeah.
So and before your closing thoughts, a plug for maybe some young people, maybe some people looking for a change of career. What might be the top 3 things, your favorite things about being a journalist?
Well, number one, if you can't decide what one job you like, the best thing about being a journalist is that every day you get to try a different job, really, right? Like you can be a biologist one day covering a story with a science story. You could be, a detective, covering a crime story, talking to people. You could, live the life of an educator, interviewing, school teachers. So that's probably one of the most exciting parts is you get to try out different jobs.
Okay.
Because you immerse yourself in the experience to tell the story. The second thing that's probably great is, what other job can you say, hi, I'm a journalist, and people just talk to you, right? It's a beautiful thing to be let into people's lives and homes simply because you're a reporter. And that's the trust we want to maintain. And then lastly, it's community service. So if you care about the community, this is one way you can definitely give back as an independent reporter.
And you would be a great person for them to contact.
Please, yes. That's what CNMI SBJ is for.
Exactly.
If you're interested, you can reach out to me. My WhatsApp is 671-747-2985. Even if you want to be a guest at one of our monthly meetings and you want to meet other reporters, please reach out to me and we'll be more than happy to have you.
That's so nice. Congratulations again. Any final thoughts before we close?
Yes, reach out to your newsroom. We're here to serve you, whichever outlet that is, hoping it's KUAM or KSPN, or I'm sure whoever you go to, that if you have a story to share, we're here to listen and we're here to serve you. And if you've ever thought about wanting to be a journalist, please reach out to us because we'd love to have you.
I think you said earlier in our chat, thank a journalist.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank every worker you see out there who's doing their best.
No, seriously,
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for what you do, and thank the team for what they do on behalf of our community. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our guest today has been Thomas Manglona II. He is the president of the CNMI Chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, also regional correspondent for KUAM News. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For more information or to share your thoughts, contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council at nmhcouncil.org or on social media at 670 Humanities. That's 670 Humanities.